And then he says, Binyan Av mishnei chsuvim, a principle that we derive from two different verses. And this you have throughout the Talmud. Anyone who studies Talmud is familiar with this. Take, for example, the laws of damages. That there's a principle. The principle is that anything that you own that causes damage to anyone, the owner is responsible. You can't argue, well, I didn't damage you. My ox damaged you. Okay, but it's your ox. You're responsible for any damage that will come from your ox. I dug a pit. Your animal fell into the pit and got hurt. A person fell into the pit and got hurt. You can't say, well, I didn't hurt you. No, you own it. It's your responsibility. Now, the Torah speaks in the concrete. The Torah doesn't say a principle. If your property does damage to anyone else, you're responsible. It's not how the Torah works. The Torah gives us a concrete example. One example, the Torah says, if you dig a pit and the animal falls into the pit and dies or gets hurt, you're responsible. And the Torah says, if your ox goes and gores another ox, you're responsible. Now, why does the Torah have to give both examples? Why doesn't the Torah just give one example? And this should become a principle. Why do you have to give two examples? Because I wouldn't know one from the other. In the case of the ox moves. The ox is a sentient being. It's an animal. It's animal life. It moves around. So therefore there it makes sense that you're responsible for all its behavior and all its actions. But a pit is stationary. It's in one place. Maybe I can argue, maybe I'm not responsible. Okay, so why do I need two examples? Let the Torah give me the example of the pit. If you dig a pit, you're responsible, liable for any damage that will result as a result of this pit that you dug. And from this I would know how much more so the animal. The pit is stationary and yet you're liable because it's yours. And you're responsible, how much more so an animal that roams and moves and sentient, surely you're responsible. No. If the Torah would only tell me a pit, I wouldn't know the animal. Because in the case of the pit, I dug the hole. You dug the hole. You made the damage. So in a way, I did the damage. The human being caused the damage. You dug a hole. We asked you to dig a hole in the middle of the street. So your digging caused the damage. That's why the Torah holds you responsible. The axe gored you. It wasn't me. I didn't gore you. I didn't do anything to gore you. So maybe in that case not. So I wouldn't know one from the other. But now that the Torah gives me both examples, the axe and the pit, two concrete examples, from this I have a Binyan Av. From this I have a father that gives off offshoots and children. Now I can build up a whole principle. What's the principle? It doesn't matter if it's a living animal, it doesn't matter if it's stationary, it doesn't matter if you dug it or you didn't dig it. It's a general principle that the Torah is teaching me. That anything that you own, you are responsible. And any damage that results from anything that you own, you are liable and you have to pay. And you have to pay from the best and the choices of your possessions, of your fields, in order to make up for the damage. So that's called the Binyan Av mishnei chsuvim, a principle that we derive from two different cases, two different examples. Another example is, we have a mitzvah in the Torah that a worker, while he's working the field, is allowed to eat from the fruits. Just like you're not allowed to muzzle your animal, he has to be able to eat from the produce that he's working on. Also, the worker is allowed to eat. He's allowed to eat. If he's working in a field, he's allowed to eat. I don't know, some restaurants, they don't let the workers eat. But it's almost cruel. You can't. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. You have to, in the field. The mitzvah applies in the field. In the field, you have to allow him to be able to eat from the fruits and the field that he's working in. So the Torah gives us two examples. One example is a worker is working in a vineyard. And another example Torah gives, if he's working with grain in the field, wheat and barley and oat and rye and spelt grain. Why does the Torah have to give me two examples? Why isn't it one example enough? Because if the Torah would only tell me the case of a vineyard, I would say, you know why? Maybe the vineyard is a special case. Since we find that the Torah is so generous, when it comes to a vineyard, the Torah says that if you have oilers, you have grapes, you have the grape, it's not full, it's not a full cluster of grapes. So you have to leave it for the poor. So we find when it comes to grapes, it's only a vineyard. The Torah is extra special. how you have to be sensitive and considerate and kind to the poor. So maybe this is the example, the exception. The Torah says, I have to feed my worker, I'm paying him. Why should I feed him? On top of paying him, I also have to feed him from my field. Why? He's in the field, I'm paying him to be in the field. Why should he allow him to eat from my fruits? So maybe, in general, he's not allowed to eat. I would be stealing. I'm paying you. When you finish work, go buy yourself lunch. What do you want from me? But the Torah made an exception when it comes to the vineyard, because you see, anyway, the Torah is so generous when it comes to the grapes and the vineyards. We're extra sensitive to leave for the poor. So in this case, the Torah says, you know what, allow your worker to eat from the grapes. But I couldn't learn from this. The same is true with anything that grows, everything else that grows. Now, the same is, had the Torah only taught me, in the case of the grain, stalks of wheat, and the Torah says he's allowed to take some and eat some, like snack on some of the kernels, I would say, you know why? The Torah is so lenient with the Torah allows us, because when it comes to grain, you see, there's a mitzvah of challah. The Torah obligates us, we have to think of the kohen, we have to give to the kohen. So the Torah is so generous, and it's extra generous with the wheat, with the grain. So therefore, the Torah says, you know what? Allow your worker to eat from it, also to snack from it, and to eat from it also. I couldn't derive from that the same is true with anything that grows. But now the Torah gives me two psukim, two examples. The Torah gives me two examples. From this I learn a general principle. Now that I have two concrete examples, the Torah is Binyan Av. I'm building up a father that gives birth to children, a whole principle. That any worker who's working in a field, anything that grows, you're obligated to allow him to eat from the fruits or from the grain or whatever he's working on. Next principle. Principle number 4. Rule number 4. Miklal uprat. Klal means when you have a general, Torah makes a general statement. For example, Torah says you're not allowed to mix clothing. You can't lay silver shatnez. You can't wear shatnez. You can't mix different material. So it's a general statement. Maybe I'm not allowed to mix anything. But then immediately the Torah gives us a prat, a specific example. Tzemer upishtim, wool and linen. So whenever the Torah starts out with a rule, a principle, a general principle, all-inclusive, and then gives us very specific, so the rule is that there's nothing else besides this example. It's not a general principle. And the Torah is giving us an example. No. Whenever the Torah says a rule, a general rule, and then immediately follows by a specific case, the Torah is coming to teach me that this is not a Binyan Av, this is not a generalization, or just an example. No. If the Torah meant it should just be an example, he shouldn't have started out with a generalization. He should have said clearly, don't wear wool and linen. So then maybe I can say this is a Binyan Av, this is a general principle, I can't mix any two fabrics together. But the Torah starts out with a generalization. Don't mix anything. And then immediately it says wool and linen. He's coming to tell us only wool and linen. Exclusively wool and linen. This is not a generalization. This is not a principle, a general principle. It specifically applies exclusively to wool and linen. The only prohibition of mixing fabric is only wool and linen, nothing else. Or for example, Torah starts out in the beginning of Leviticus. Adam ki yakriv mekem karbim na behema. If you want to bring a sacrifice from an animal. Now throughout the Torah, when the Torah says animal, like it says on Shabbos, your animal is not allowed to work. So we know, when the Torah says animal, it doesn't mean a domesticated animal. It doesn't necessarily mean cattle, sheep, goats. It means even the other 7 kosher animals, the wild animals. It's also included that you're not allowed to work. The Torah says behema. Behema is a general word for all animals, not necessarily domestic animals, even wild animals. So when the Torah starts out and says you bring a sacrifice, bring it from the animal. What animal are we referring to? Does it have to be a domestic animal? No, it could be any of the 10 kosher animals. But then immediately the Torah spells out and says no. The Torah says min habakar u'min hatzayin. Which animals are you allowed to bring a sacrifice? Exclusively from cattle and from sheep, which means goats and sheep. That's it. Only the 3 domesticated animals are you allowed to bring as a sacrifice. None of the 7 kosher wild animals are you allowed to offer in the temple as a sacrifice. So even though the Torah starts out with a generalization, But then immediately spells out and he goes into specifics. He's telling us that only this does not become a general principle that's all inclusive. No, it's not a general principle. It's exclusive. This and nothing else. Then rule number 5. Prat Klal. Here is the reverse. The Torah starts out with specifics and then ends off with a generalization. For example, the Torah talks about a beili. If you ask someone to watch something for you, and all the laws that are involved. So the Torah starts out, if you will give to your friend a donkey, an ox, or a sheep, and that's very specific. He's being very specific. And then he says, and any animal that you give him to watch. He's very general. So the fact that the Torah first starts out with the details, and then he concludes with the generalization. This comes to teach us that everything is included, not just these animals that the Torah specifies, but any animal that your friend gives you to watch is included in these laws. Or, for example, it says you find a lost item, you're obligated to return it, to restore it to its original owner. So the Torah starts out with something specific. Torah starts out that if you find this donkey or you find this garment, so the Torah starts out with something specific, giving specific examples. So you would think that maybe only if you find a garment, they are obligated to return it to its owner. So if you find a donkey, not anything else. So the Torah concludes and says no. And v'chein ta'aseh, so should you do l'chol avedas achicha. Whatever you find, anything that's lost, any lost item, it doesn't matter what. So the Torah starts out with something specific, with details, and then he concludes with a generalization. She's coming to teach us that everything is included. 100%, there's no exceptions. The Gemara will say, why did the Torah spell out all these items? Each one is coming to teach me something. But really, everything is included. Anything you find, any lost object that you find, you're obligated to restore it to its owner. So the next one is, the 6th one is, Klal Prat Klal. When the Torah starts out with a generalization, then the Torah gives us specifics, specifies, and then he concludes, wraps it up with a general rule. So there's a general rule, then specifics, sandwiched by specifics, and then he concludes with a general rule. So it's not like a klal or prat, which means all there is the specifications, because he ends up with a generalization. It's not like a specifics and a generalization, and that includes everything. Nothing is excluded, because he starts out with a generalization and then specifics. So what's the Torah coming to teach me? He's coming to teach me, he's coming to teach me that, yes, the Torah is adding, and there is a generalization, it's coming to be more general, but the Torah is telling us that we only add, the last generalization only adds, doesn't add everything, it only adds things that are similar to those things that were specified in the middle. So the Torah, yes, is coming to broaden, it's coming to add, it's not only these specific items, but what things do we add? Only items that are similar to everything that the Torah spelled out. For example, it says by the second tithing, a Jew in Israel, which was primarily an agricultural society, so the first fruits was bikurim. You had to bring to the temple and give it to the kohen, the bikurim. Then truma, also, you gave it to the kohen. Then you gave 10% after what was left over, 10% you give to the Levites. After that, another 10%. So the first and second year, and the fourth and fifth year of the sabbatical, you would take that 10%. It belonged to you, but it was sacred. You had to take those fruits and the yield, and you had to eat it in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim, in sanctity. You had to eat it in Yerushalayim. If it was too hard, too far, too distant to travel with truckloads of fruits, you can redeem the fruits, the value, substitute it for money, and money you can carry. Bring the money to Jerusalem, and you have to spend the money in Yerushalayim and eat, and only on food, and eat that food in Yerushalayim. And you can't eat it if you're impure, you can't eat it if someone died, if you're in mourning. It's sacred, it's considered sacred, and you have to take it to Yerushalayim. So the Torah says that if it's too much to carry, so redeem the fruits with money. So you transfer the holiness from the fruits to the money. Now the fruits are no longer holy, so you can eat it in your home. Bring the money to Jerusalem. And what do you do with this money? So the Torah spells out, what do you do with this money? The Torah says, starts out, whatever you want. Buy with it whatever your heart desires, whatever your soul desires. It's a generalization, anything. But then the Torah gets very specific. You can buy cattle with it. You can buy sheep with it. You can buy wine. You can buy beer. So the Torah is very specific, what you can use your money. It doesn't say anything. First he starts out, use the money, whatever you want, whatever your heart desires, whatever your soul desires. Whatever you desire. Then he says specifics, cattle, sheep, wine, beer. And then he concludes, whatever you desire, whatever you want. So he starts out whatever you want, he ends up whatever you want. In the middle, he gives us examples what you can use your money for. So what is it? So what's it coming to teach us? So it's coming to teach us, yes, it's much broader than the examples that Torah gives. Torah is not limiting us to cattle and sheep and wine and beer. But the Torah is telling us, yes, it's a klal, and it's a general, you can buy for any food, but what kind of food? Only the type of food that's similar to the examples that the Torah gives. What's the common denominator of all the examples that the Torah gives? Cattle and sheep and wine and beer. What's the common denominator? Two common denominators. Firstly, each one of them is a fruit from a fruit. The cattle was born from a cattle that was born. The grapes came from a seed from another grape that grew. So it's a fruit from a fruit. It's something that grows and grows and continues to grow and could grow endlessly. You know, you take the seed and you replant it and it can go on and on and on. So you could only spend it for types of foods that have the ability to reproduce and go on and on and on. And they all have to be things that grow from the ground. Wine grows from the ground. The grapes, beer also, hops grows from the ground. Or you make it from dates, whatever you make it, or figs, all the different ways you make the beer in those days. And even the animals live off the ground. The animals graze in the grass, they live off the ground, they nourish from the ground. So any food that has these qualities, that they come from something that's an offshoot from an offshoot that continues and has the ability to continue on, and something that's nourished and raised from the ground, those are the only items you can spend the money for. The money, this sacred money that you redeemed the fruits and released the fruits, and now you transfer the money from the holiness, you redeemed it into this money. Now you can only use this money in Jerusalem for food that has these qualities. What does it come to exclude? Which food doesn't have these qualities? Water. Water doesn't reproduce. Mushrooms. Mushrooms reproduce, but mushrooms really don't grow from the ground. It's a fungus. Mushroom grows from the air. It doesn't really grow from the ground. It's a fungus. It clings to the rock or whatever, but it's not from the ground, but it doesn't really nourish from the ground. It's a fungus. So you can't use this meiser money, this sacred money, to buy water and mushrooms. Only fruits, animals, etc. Meat. So this is an example of there's a general rule, and then the Torah is specifics, and then the Torah is a general rule again. So this comes to include, it's broader, it's a generalization, but it's limited. The Torah is limiting, giving us the specifics, it's sandwiched in between the generalization and the generalization between, to modify that which things are we including, not everything, but it's a generalization, but anything that fits into this category that all the specifics have in common, which all examples the Torah give have this in common. That it's something that reproduces, a type of food that reproduces, a type of food that relies on the ground and grows from the ground. That's one example. Another example, there's hundreds of examples. Another example, that it says, when the Torah says that if you ask someone to watch something for you, and you come to collect it, and the person claims it was stolen, or he denies it, or he admits half. You said, I gave you $100 to watch for me, and the guy says, no, only $50. It's called a Moed b'Miktzas. He's admitting, partially admitting. So in that case, he has to swear, he has to take an oath. Biblically, he has to take an oath. Since he's partially admitting, so you have to swear on the other 50 that what he's saying is true. That he only gave you $50 to watch and not $100. And the same thing if someone is watching something from you and he denies it. He says no, or was lost, or it was stolen. So you have to swear. First the Torah says, Akol dvar pesha, anything that he was negligent. And then the Torah says, Al shir, an ox, al chamer, and a donkey. So the Torah is very specific. This only applies to an ox and a donkey. And then the Torah says, Akol aved, anything, any object. So first the Torah starts out with the generalization. The Torah ends with the generalization, but in the middle the Torah gives us very concrete, specific examples. So which one is it? So this is the rule. This is rule number 6. That Klal Prat Klal. Yes, the Torah is making a generalization, but the Torah is restricting and limiting the generalization that it has to fit with the examples that he gives. What's the common denominator of the examples that he gives? That they are all movable items. The donkey, the ox, things that are movable. So if there's a dispute, a real estate dispute, real estate is not movable. So if you're arguing about a property, this law doesn't apply. There's no oath on a property. You stole this land, I admit 50%, but not the other, or whatever, I owe you 50%. No, there's no oath. These laws only apply on something that's movable. Anything that's movable, not only a donkey or an ox. The Torah gives us concrete examples, but it's a generalization. The Torah is a principle. But nevertheless, the Torah is teaching us these examples. If he just means anything, he just say everything. Why is he giving us a generalization? In the middle he gives us concrete, specific examples. He's coming to modify that we don't include everything. It's only things that fit into these examples that share the same characteristic traits of these examples. Meaning it has to be a movable item. So it comes to exclude real estate, or servants who are compared to real estate, it also comes to exclude, it has to be something that has intrinsic value. Like an ox has intrinsic value, a donkey has intrinsic value. Money, not today's money. Today's money is a piece of paper. It's very deceptive. The dollar bill looks the same today as it did in 1950. I think it's worth a penny of what it was worth in 1950. It's just paper. But in the olden days, money was real. It was silver. It was the weight of the money, the value of the money, the silver, the copper. It had a value. So something that has an intrinsic value, then these laws apply. Something that doesn't have intrinsic value, let's say it's a document. You damage a document, or you're arguing over a document, then the document has no value. It's a piece of paper. What's it worth? It's just a note. A note doesn't have the same laws because it doesn't have any intrinsic value. So only something, so that's what the Torah is coming to modify. To teach us that this generalization, this rule, this principle is only applicable if A, it's movable, and B, if it has intrinsic value. These are just examples. I mean, there are many, too numerous to enumerate. So these are the 6 of the 13 principles. There is one case where the Gemara brings, there's actually, the Torah starts out with a specific, ends with a specific, and in the center you have a general principle. So then there should be 14 principles. So some want to say it's the same, it's included in this, it's the same idea. The Torah is giving us an example of a klal or prat klal, a generalization, a specific, and a generalization. But the same, he also includes anything similar, which is starts out with a specific, in the middle is a generalization, and then ends up with something specific and concrete. But anyway, that's very controversial. We're not going to get into that right now. So these are 6 of the 13. With Hashem's help, next week we'll conclude the Braisa of Rabbi Yishmael. Any questions, comments, thoughts? I know it's very involved, but that's the whole point of reading it every day. The rabbis wanted we should fulfill the mitzvah of learning Gemara every day. So you have to learn this. You have to understand it. You have to know what you're saying. These are the principles, the foundation of the whole oral Torah. And this is parallels the 13 attributes of mercy, which draws down by learning the Torah and revealing the Torah. You reveal and draw down the 13 attributes of mercy, and you reveal all the revealed blessings in your life. So at least the rabbis wanted every Jew in the world should get a taste of Talmud, to get a taste of studying Torah, fulfill the obligation of studying Torah, especially the 13 attributes. which reveal the 13 attributes of mercy, the 13 rules and principles which reveal the 13 attributes of mercy. And this is the foundation of the book of Leviticus, the foundation of the sacrifices. And by studying Torah, you have to understand what you're saying. If you don't understand what you're saying, you can't make a blessing of the Torah. Blessing of the Torah is only if you understand what you're saying, understand what you're learning. So we have to learn it. The Rebbe, when he would finish Rabbi Yishmael, he would say it in the tone of learning. Not like davening, because this is learning. You have to say it even in the tone of learning. So that's why we're learning this. So it's a little different than all the other Siddur classes. There we were more into the, interpreting the prayers, much more spiritual. Here we're learning the laws. Also in the Mishnayos, we learned the laws of the Mishnayos the last few classes. This 5th chapter of Zavachim, Izel Mekayman. Also to fulfill the mitzvah of studying Mishnayos. So you have to know and learn and understand. And then when you say it every day, you can repeat it every day. If it's hard to grasp it the first time, hopefully with Hashem's help, you could review it. And then every day when you say it, you should try to understand what we're saying. And by reviewing it every day, you'll have a whole new, you'll say it in a whole different way, and hopefully a whole new appreciation for this. To be continued.